Hi everyone, welcome to this webinar about actions speak louder than labels. My name is Jamie Turner. I'm CEO and CTO of a company called PCA Predict, formerly known as Postcode Anywhere. If you are a UK, based here in the UK, you will probably have never heard of us, but you will almost definitely have used our software. Our software is used in e-commerce checkouts and call centres as a way of capturing address data. What we're going to talk about today, though, is how we can start to collect data and do smarter things with it in an online world, actually to mirror the best of what the offline world can offer. So let's get started. As a fundamental premise for decision making, we believe that good decisions require good data. And what do we mean by that? Well, it not only lets us make good decisions, but it also highlights when we're making bad ones. And hopefully we can identify when we're making bad ones faster and we can change and improve them. This is really important because if we don't have the information to support our decisions, we're really flying blind. But one of the questions that immediately follows from that is what data do we need to capture in order to make decisions? And this can often be the first problem because really we don't know. Sometimes it is those little nuggets of data, those small facts that are hidden away in a haystack of noise that are really important for us. More often than not, we try and capture very simple data, very naive data, and again base our decisions on it. Sometimes that can also be unhelpful for us because by basing decisions on poor data or irrelevant data, again, we can give ourselves the illusion that these are good decisions. So let's look at this in a little bit more detail. In a smaller business, it's very easy often to have access to the data you need to make decisions. And it's actually very easy to then do something about it. And that's really how we've built our business. 16 years ago, we started Postcode Anywhere. And in the last 16 years, we've grown to serving 10,000 customers across the world with 60 members of staff. But in the early days, you need to be agile as you do as you grow older. But being agile means you need to get the data to make those decisions. And actually, that's quite simple when you're a smaller business because you can collect the information. You've already got it in front of you. You can do it quite quickly. You've not typically got too much to deal with. And then you can try and make changes and act on it as quickly as you can. The problem is, as we grow, so as businesses get bigger and inevitably more complicated, you tend to start having more data to work with. So this volume of data can start to introduce complexity. Because how do I actually churn it? How do I collect it? How can I make sense of it? And the volume as well can be a problem on a different aspect because it can be of different types. You know, we may have to start considering different types of messages, whether they're emails, less structured information, stuff that we might get from our web server logs, nuances from customers and those sorts of things. So the volume of data becomes a challenge for us. And a challenge that's not easily reconciled, but there's ways around it. The next problem, though, is that as we start to get bigger and bigger and more data comes on board, now we've got a different problem, a different dimension to struggle with. Because of the volume of data that we have, we actually can't deal with it instantly. We typically need a bit of different tooling. We might have to collect it from different parts of the business, etc. So to make those decisions, not only am I now starting to get a little bit further removed because the data is more complicated and I need to collect it from many different sources, but it's also just going to take time to pull it all together. So this is making me further away from the data that I need as a decision maker to make those decisions. And of course there's another dimension as well. Because as all of this stuff gets more complicated, as we have things that are taking longer, there's data in more places, it's more complex, I need to make more sense of it, that also requires different skills, maybe different reporting lines, different individuals and tool sets to gather and collect it and to make sense of it. So I can't get it myself. I can't self-serve that data that I need as a decision maker to make good decisions. So on all these dimensions, we have a fundamental disconnect between the decision makers and the data to support those decisions that they need to make. And this is an absolutely critical issue for all businesses, and especially growing businesses. Because whereas as a small business, I can see the data as it happens. I can understand it, I can make decisions based on it, and I can do something about it because I have all of those parts of the puzzle myself. In a growing business, in a larger business, one with greater structure, more tiers between me and the raw data, that data is no longer present immediately to me. In fact, it may be days, weeks, or in larger corporates, even months before the data emerges. And it's all been mined by individuals, everyone with their own different take on the situation and their own different views of how they should deal with the data. This is a real issue for businesses as they grow, and it's a huge problem when we start to look at how we then deal with the data. Because not only are we disconnected from the data, but people are now involved in analysing it. Now, analysing data is a complicated job. That's why data scientists and analysts are in such demand these days. But there's also a problem with this approach. People are always trying to prove something. In other words, their analysis is often driven by an idea of what might be happening and then trying to prove it. This immediately narrows the analysis and makes it more subjective. In other words, I might have an idea of what to do, what this data is telling me, and I'll start looking there. So within that haystack, I've already started focusing on a small part of it rather than looking at it as a whole. This is where you can start to use more modern techniques to broaden your view. By using machine learning, we can start to take out the human bias, the subjectivity and the occasional ego on the way. Moreover, analysis is about crunching numbers and finding patterns, and that's something that machines are very good at doing on a scale that we have never been able to achieve before. So how can we do this? Well, we have to collect data. We have to collect lots of data from lots of different places, all at the same time. Now, that may be data from your website. It may be from internal systems like Salesforce. It may be from external systems like Twitter and Facebook. Even emails contain information about how your customers feel about you. All of these insights build a picture of what's going on. The faster you can consume that data, the faster you can make sense of the data, the faster you can affect some change and improve what's happening. Now, we've been working on products and projects within our business to try and deal with exactly this. And it's absolutely critical that you start to consider the whole experience of your customers rather than just single isolated parts. And what we have done with our research is to try and do things a little differently, to try and gather and curate all of this in real time, and then to start doing the analysis in real time so that we can start to identify what's new and what's different, what's special and what's unusual is vital to knowing that. The more we can identify these changes and disparities, the better we will be at making decisions. And again, we're doing this without people involved. That's not to say that people can't provide a huge amount of value to the decision making, but we need to give them the right, relevant and special facts as they appear. That's what the machine can do very, very well for us. Now, the other thing that's important when we start to consider this approach is that we're not talking about traditional analysis tools like Google Analytics, Tableau and so on. What we're trying to do is to use technology, to use the machine learning techniques that are now available to us, to use strong, robust statistical analysis to start to make decisions and to identify what is genuinely different and special. This again is really, really important, because there's no point having loads of people just walking through the data again with a relatively myopic view of what's going on. We need to keep our eyes as open as possible with as much data to provide us with a higher resolution picture of what's happening to our customers. And by doing that, we can then start to perform this full spectrum analysis of the data, so that we can point out things as they happen as well. So if we think of that data disconnect, those three key dimensions, if we are aiming to connect decision makers with the data, then we need to process all of those different types of data, all of those different sources, collect them all together. That's easily done using these techniques. And because of the speed that we have these days, we can start to narrow the time horizon by which we can make decisions. And of course, by providing tools that give us direct access to it, it makes life a lot easier for a decision maker to be directly connected to the data as and when it happens. Now, traditionally, analysis uses demographics or even personas to group people. And that's a great way of understanding how people behave, because one 40-year-old earning so many thousands of dollars a year behaves exactly like the next. Really? Do we honestly believe that? Because how I behave changes all the time. And that's usually driven by what's going on around me and not by my age or my income bracket. So why do we continue to adopt these approaches? Well, of course, they're easy. They're simple, they're generic, and the data is relatively easily accessible in an offline world. But if you think about it, when I go into a store, I may go into the store one evening on an emergency trip to go and get some milk in the paper, or I may be there on a Saturday morning with the whole family in tow. It may take more than an hour. It will be a very different experience, but I'm still me, but I'm behaving differently. And I would expect a different level of service, different support from the store around me. Now, a good store owner, good members of staff will see that someone is hassled, running fast, trying to jump to the automated checkout to get in and out within a few seconds. At the same time, they will understand that someone who is racing around trying to chase the kids down the ice cream aisle probably does need a bit of different help, a bit more hands-on. Humans are very good at identifying these subtle behavioural cues, and machines are not. Personas completely ignore them typically. So in-store, as in most areas of life, it's what you do, not necessarily who you are or these abstract definitions, that really count. Now let's be honest, people don't like saying how much they earn. They certainly don't like saying how old they are. But this is especially true online, because in a store, I can maybe get an idea of wealth levels from your shoes and those sorts of things, your age just by looking at you. I can't see any of that online. And in fact, online, people actively try and hide their identity until they really have to. But who cares? Imagine looking at a store from above. Imagine you can't see people's faces, but you watch the speed at which they go round, which aisles they go to, their basic behaviours. It's not now about what shoes you wear, what clothes you have on, or your age, or your gender, or any of these other more personal aspects. It's actually about what you are doing and the type of support. So if I see someone racing in, I might give them really simple cues to, this is where the milk is, this is where the paper is. Now this is really important because behaviours are easy to see. All of these other metrics are very hard. And actually, personas are there to try and help us infer how people behave. But just as in a store, where I can see what people are doing, online I can do exactly the same. Behaviours are primary evidence because I can easily capture what pages you're looking at, what things you've clicked on, how quickly you move through the site, your speed, velocity, all these sorts of things, and some environmental cues, the type of device you're using, the orientation of the device, the location of the world that you are. All of these things I have, and I have the data that is very, very accurate and robust. So rather than converting behaviours into demographic groups to then infer behaviours, we can go straight to the behaviours. We can capture that. We're not translating something from English to Chinese and back into English, because we all know that never works properly. The same is true of traditional techniques. Translating behaviours into personas or demographic groups and then back and inferring behaviours from them just doesn't work. It's only now, though, that we have the tools and the technology to make something of all of that raw data, and to do so swiftly. But there's another side of this that's really important. In an average online store, people who are visiting will be browsing. There may be about 4% of people who then go on and buy from us. Those 4% will be forced to expose themselves. In other words, to put in their name and address, so that we can then apply those demographic groups, so we'll understand where they are in the world, what they're doing, and these sorts of things. That's all very useful, but it's only for 4% of my audience. For the rest, I'm blind. But the behaviours can be exhibited by everyone, and we can capture them for everyone. So, before just looking at demographics, I could only do intelligent things for 4% of my audience. And those are the ones who have been forced into giving up their details. Whereas now, by looking at behaviours, which everyone exhibits, I've got some valuable information and insights to another 96% of my users. That's almost 25 times more people now that I understand and that I can provide an intelligent level of support. That's very, very valuable. So before I knew what was happening to 4% of my visitors, maybe a week or a month ago. But now I can see what's happening in real time to everyone using these sorts of technologies. Wouldn't it be better, though, if we could start to peer into the future and predict what's going to happen? Well, we can do that. Again, using machine learning techniques and gaming principles, we can start to build real-time models that will predict behaviours based on what we've seen before. So we can start to get an idea of what's going to happen next and to whom. This is also important because if we compare a little bit further down that journey, we can start to get an idea of whether things are going well for our customers or whether they're not. Think of the game Snakes and Ladders, Chutes and Ladders. Think of how that moves. You move through the game, things go well, you go up a ladder, things go badly, you go down a snake or a chute. The journey through a website and any customer journey is actually very, very similar. Good things will happen, which will progress you towards a winning outcome, which might be a sale, and bad things may happen as well. But you can't do it without actually rolling that dice. And that dice in this game is every click of the mouse, every page that you look at. All of these things will start to help build a picture. And we can then start to understand, are lots of good things happening to you? Are you getting closer? Can we predict that you are more likely to make a purchase? Or are things starting to go south? Can we now use these predictive models to get an idea that you once looked like things were going well, but you're not anymore? And if I can use those predictions, what can I do about them? Because knowing something is about to happen is fantastic, but I still then need to have the ability to affect some change or to do something about it. This is all really important because these approaches to understanding more of what your customers do, these tools to start to bring you to a state where you're more connected to your customers, are useless if you don't have any capability to make a change. And it's really important for people to consider that. What we can also do, though, is by understanding people's behaviours and how they change over time, not only individuals, but also on on a wider level, we can now start to see how different trends happen on our website. Trends to do with ads. Have we got, for example, lots of people coming into our site where the predicted outcomes are poor because they have come from a certain source? Maybe someone's flamed us on Twitter and people are coming to have a look, but they're not going to do anything. These are important things to know, and again, knowing that in real time is hugely valuable. And it's the ability to connect, to do that analysis as and when it happens, that is really, really important. So when we consider what we know about customers and how we might improve those outcomes, how can we do that? Well, this is a real challenge, because if things are looking bad for customers, then you might provide them with an offer. You might provide them with a coupon. You might even, if it's going really bad, pick up the phone to them. But actually, the converse is true as well. If something's going well, then is there something there that we can really start to make something of? Because if customers are very happy, if they're very engaged, then that's a great opportunity for us to do an upsell, to try and improve that experience. But anything that we do, we need to use data to prove that it does generate improvements. And this is the other aspect that people need to consider very carefully. We're very used to A/B testing, but it's relatively naive in its approach, and it can take time for the tests to run. When we start to combine A/B testing with predictive analysis, we start to get a very early heads up on the possible outcomes that the tests might show us. So that means we can start to learn faster. We can start to learn faster and smarter, and also by looking at the best possible outcomes, realized and predicted, for these tests, instead of doing A/B tests, we can do a whole alphabet of tests. And then we can again use that data to figure out which segments, and these could be segments based on device, time of day, location, or composites of these, which of these can start to help us provide the best possible incentives to our customers and the best possible experience. Because one size never fits all. But having an intelligent prediction engine is really important. And this comes on to another fundamental problem with numbers. The statistics especially can provide us with insights in many things. And people tend to use numbers quite blindly. But we all know that it's very easy to make mistakes, and also to not understand the numbers that we're dealing with. As an example, we know that accuracy is everything. That makes perfect sense. So let's consider the situation where I can build a system that with 96% accuracy will tell us the outcome of each session on your website. Now, 96% accuracy sounds pretty good. Those are fantastic odds that you would almost definitely take in Vegas. And Vegas is a long way from where I am right now in the sort of soggy UK. But if we start to think about these numbers properly, do they actually stack up? In other words, is accuracy everything? How we understand these things is really important. To say that I can predict this with 96% accuracy is actually nonsense. Why? Well, we've already established that only about 4% of people visiting my website are likely to convert. So because I know that 96% of sessions will fail anyway, I could say that absolutely every person who comes to the site, I could make a prediction that everyone who turns up is going to fail. And I would be right 96% of the time. When we start to think about numbers, it's really important that we understand them, and that's not something that most people are good at. And that's why we tend to employ analysts, statisticians, data scientists to really make sense of it. And it's important that the tools that we use and we rely on have these robust elements built in. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but there is a principle called a ROC, or receiver operating curve. And what this does, this says that in any predictions, you need to know how good you are at getting the right answer, as well as how good you are at not getting the wrong one. And that's the crucial part of this. It's really, really important that when we start to make predictions, when we start to generate insights, when we start to make commercial grade decisions, we understand the data that we're working on. We understand the margin of error. We understand the likelihood of something going wrong. Because data-driven decisions are really crucial. But what's more important is that we all understand the impact of them, and we understand what the data is genuinely telling us. So that kind of gives us a very simple overview of our views on predictive analytics and how that can be, and especially using behaviours to try and drive outcomes and marketing and support for your customers. We've got a number of questions from the audience. I really appreciate those. So I'll go through those one by one. The first question, do we have a channel with more webinars that you can watch? We do. We'll put some details up after this. And we're working on this all the time as well. We're starting to do some quite cool stuff, certainly on the tech side as well as on the sort of higher level stuff as well. For anyone who's interested in the underlying technology behind this, again, I'm more than happy to have a chat, and we'll do some additional presentations for that. Interesting question here as well. Do you think there will be any new regulations concerning data governance when it comes to tracking customer behaviour? Almost certainly. And I think the governance of this type of data will become very, very important. You start to come across issues of data sovereignty. So people in the US, for example, can their behavioural data leave the US? Same with Europe. We have very, very tight data security standards and data protection regulations across the world, not all of them fully align. Now, tracking people's behaviours, if it's anonymous, is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? If you're using it to generate better outcomes, then you could argue it's a good thing, but these are things that will probably have to be tested. We have to also consider what can be done in the real world. And I think sometimes there is often a big disparity in regulation between the offline world and the online world, the type of tracking that is already done in shopping centres and shopping malls compared with what might be done on a website. Politicians usually, and legislatures, are very far behind the curve. But I think, we need to try and not come up with reactionary issues. We've noticed that very frequently in Europe with the European cookie laws, which many would say are bad legislation, poorly thought through and poorly executed, with very, very few benefits to end users and to anyone, in fact. It may have made the politicians feel happy about things, but I can't say that I think it was necessarily good legislation protecting consumers. And there's another question here as well. I believe in the power of predictive analytics, but do you have any tips on communicating value to my old school manager? I think sometimes the best thing to do is to try and put it in an old school way. So to try and imagine how it would work in a store, as we've tried to describe here. If you can use the machines as the eyes and ears of your best possible sales agent, to try and mimic and to automate that and to do it on a larger scale, would that not be a good thing? But as I've touched on, it's really important that you have the ability to do something with that as well. We've come across many customers, many companies, where they have great data that could generate real value, but the data is very, very time sensitive. In an offline world, sending someone a letter, sending them an email, sending them, maybe calling them or sending someone to visit them, you have got hours, days, maybe weeks to work these things through the system. It's very kind of batch oriented. If you're doing this on a website, you only have people's attention for minutes at best, often seconds, and that means you need to make decisions at the level of seconds, which we can do with these sorts of tools, but it's also then trying to do something about it. So what kind of improvements can we offer to those customers? And what are we willing to delegate out to that machinery? Are we going to let the tooling, for example, dish out a 10% discount if someone looks like they're a little bit shaky on a purchase? How often do we want to do that? And who's got the authority to push that over to a machine? These are more systemic questions that many companies, frankly, are just not set up to answer. The counterpoint, though, is that those that embrace it, those that are willing to adopt the technology and to make it work for them and actually to reorganize their business around it, those are the ones that will probably fly, because those will be the ones that provide much more intelligent and engaging experiences for their customers, and ones which are probably more sensitive to the issues as they happen to their customers, and will improve, they will learn, and they're the ones most likely to thrive. I don't think we have any more questions, and so I'd like to thank you all for listening. If you have any questions, you can tweet me at PCAJamie. I'm more than happy to answer anything, and have a great day. Thanks for listening.